So in recent times, I've heard politicians such as Donald Trump say that because other countries have trade surpluses with the United States is subsidizing that economy. To me, that argument is completely nonsensical. There is no subsidy going on, and we're just going to go through the whole concept of trade surpluses here to help you understand. Let's dive in. So first and foremost, we have to understand what a trade surplus is. So if you think about two countries, well, both countries export and import from one another, and whoever exports a greater quantity or greater value of goods than the other one has a trade surplus, and the other country who imports more than it exports has a trade deficit. In reality, if this were to happen only for 1 year, you'd want to be the person with a trade deficit. Why is that the case? Well, think about it this way. This country's sending you $500 million worth of goods, value of goods, and you're just sending them, let's say, $100 million worth of goods. So in essence, you're sending them less value than they're sending you. So you are effectively consuming more than the other country. You're getting more value of goods than you're sending them. They're at a loss in this. But what they get in exchange is they get currency or treasury bills or something else to compensate for that imbalance. So typically speaking, that's why we see that a lot of foreigners have a lot of American debt, because they have trade surpluses with them. And that's why you hear some people say that Canadians in other countries are subsidizing to some respect the production of goods in the States in terms of their investment. So setting up a business requires money, and to get that money, you need to get access to people's savings. And when a lot of Canadians are buying different financial instruments in the States to in their portfolio, well, that money is available to these businesses, and these businesses use this money to grow as a company. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. We have this situation where they're effectively buying more than that they're giving. So if you think about it as just two individuals, you're with a friend, he gives you a lot more product than you give him. All that means is in the future, the person that's getting more now will owe the other person more in the future. Okay, so consuming more now, consuming more later, that's really the big difference here. And if we think about why these trade balances occur, well, it's just the relative cost of goods in different countries might make it more appealing for Americans to buy abroad. And then you could think about this idea of more money flowing into the States for treasury bills and other financial devices, which props up the value of the American currency. So the American currencies, when your currency is seen as a little higher, it means that it's much easier to import goods because your currency is worth more, and it favors the other country's exports. That's fine. But it's not a bad thing. It's not a situation of one country subsidizing another. So what's going to happen when these trade barriers start appearing, these tariffs start appearing? Well, all of a sudden, it's going to mean that these foreign goods that used to be purchased are now much more expensive, which means that if there is a domestic company that could produce those goods, well, that's a possibility. But sometimes that's not a possibility. So it's really just they're going to keep buying those imported goods, but they're going to face this extra charge. And that extra charge is going to be paid by the companies that are importing these goods and the individuals buying these goods. So costs in the United States will go up as soon as these tariffs go up. If, on the other hand, they have the capacity of producing those goods, well, then they can produce them more locally. But the reason why they weren't buying them locally before is because they were more expensive than abroad. So even though you're putting a 25% tariff, if the goods domestically are 15% more than what Canadian goods used to be, well, the consumers are still going to face a greater cost. And at the end of the day, when you have all of these countries introducing tariffs on one another, you're kind of pushing away this idea of every country should specialize and then trade, because that's how we get to consume more. So a good way to visualize this is to think back in the old days where you used to have a rancher, a blacksmith, and other specialized workers. Well, if you imagine that none of these workers wanted to trade with one another, there's an argument that happens and the blacksmith doesn't want to trade with the rancher. Well, all of a sudden, you have to be self-sufficient. You have to start producing everything yourself. So think about an individual who would have to produce his metal, have to produce his food, his clothing, and whatnot. In that situation, you're probably going to end up with a lot less goods, a lot less things to consume, because to be able to do everything is going to be very costly. You're going to have to learn to do everything. You're going to have maybe some of the specialized tools to do everything. So it's much less good than saying, I'm going to focus on this, you focus on that, you focus on that, and let's just all meet and trade. In that situation, there's going to be gains from trade through the specialization sphere. So if we think about countries closing in on themselves, there are some short-term advantages in the sense that you're trying to bring some of these businesses back. But as soon as you do that, these other countries are not just going to sit by and accept that you're going to impose tariffs. They're also going to impose tariffs on your goods. So all of a sudden, all of those businesses that you have domestically that used to send products abroad will all of a sudden no longer be producing. And it's just going to lead to a situation where there's going to be less goods available to everyone. And then to understand this whole idea of who gets hurt by these taxes or tariffs, we have to understand who's most desperate in this story. And the person that's most desperate typically bears the greater burden, in the sense that if you have a tariff that's being introduced, if you're the company that faces this tariff, if you could easily export to another market, you're just going to say, nah, I'm not interested, export elsewhere. You want to keep buying my product, keep paying the price you used to pay, and that extra tariff, that's you guys that are dealing with it. But on the other hand, if this company is very desperate because it can't ship abroad, well then they might say, well, I used to sell this product at $1,000 and now there's this 25% tariff, so consumers would pay $12.50 to get this product. I'm going to lower my price a little bit, so even with the tariff, the price hasn't changed that much. I'm going to take a hit to be able to keep on selling. And all of this depends on who is more desperate or who is more elastic. So all of this that we're learning here, this application could be applied, and all of the trade policy stuff that we're going to see in class, elasticity, taxation, all of those concepts revolve and are kind of intertwined into this story here. And the gains from trade and so on and so forth. So hopefully with this video on why trade surpluses does not lead to subsidization and all of the pitfalls of these tariffs, we're going to understand that this is not a good idea, a good thing to be adopted, and understand the use of all of the material that you're going to see in microeconomics or macroeconomics courses, and understand how what are all the ripple effects that would happen if a country like the US would introduce tariffs on other countries. If you found this video interesting, please consider subscribing or joining my class where I guide you to apply and expand on the information found in these videos to real-life examples. Have a good day.